But I also feel like today is going to be a rare occurrence where a mental health professional doesn't speak on World Mental Health Day, but we get to hear from experts from other sectors to talk about mental health and well-being, which is how it should be. I just wanted to say good evening to everyone, or good morning, dependent on which time zone you're joining in from. And thank you for joining us over here today. And a warm welcome to this discussion on work-life balance. Is it myth? Is it a myth or is it real? For me, I think work-life balance is a phrase that we hear often, and yet it seems to remain so stubbornly out of reach for most individuals and organizations. Across India, our cultures are very, very deeply shaped by hierarchy, long hours, and also a sense of duty that often blurs the line between professional and personal life. And I think you would agree with me as well that the digital era has only intensified this with the always on culture that really makes it hard for us to switch off when we at work. But it's not only so grim. There has also been a shift. The pandemic redefined what we expect from our jobs. Flexibility, empathy, and meaning have become part of the vocabulary at the workplace. And what I really like is that younger generations are asking tougher questions, not just how much we work, but why and at what cost. So, as we dive into today's conversation, I invite us to reflect on a few things as you also hear our panelists speak. One, which is what makes India's culture uniquely stressful and what might be changing. And two, most importantly, what can organizations and individuals realistically do to make work-life balance a lived reality? So I'm really looking forward to unpacking these questions with our panelists today. I'm very excited for that, Krish and Aparna, and to hear all of your insights. And we can perhaps just dive in directly now. What I'd like to do is start off with some very broad questions to set the scene, and you can decide which order you would like to go in because it's directed at both of you. These initial questions. So the first question I have is what would you say is specific about India's culture that makes it so stressful? If you could reflect on problems that have been age old, but also new challenges whilst you are answering this question.
Let me start with a little bit of data because I just like to say I write about mental health. I live with a mental health condition also, and I guess that's the reason that qualifies me to talk about it a little bit. I am not an experienced HR professional like Krish, but I do also work with companies and do workshops with them around the whole area of workplace mental health. So I'll just share some data. And McKinsey had done a study about 3 years ago looking at mental health in Asia. And they felt that they looked at causes of stress, anxiety, depression, burnout. And India actually topped the list even in Asia, right? So where, we always assume that many Asian countries are similar in terms of being hierarchical, but India was actually very high on that. About 40% of the people, surveyed were suffering from something like this. And they attributed it really to a very, toxic workplaces, especially work cultures, which are very toxic. And to answer your question, I think, Urvita, you said it yourself that, we are a very deeply hierarchical country. We are a deeply patriarchal country. So obviously, all the ramifications and results of that will be seen in the workplace. The workplace is not insulated from the rest of our society and culture, which is not to say that we're a terrible country. Of course, we're not. But I think that some of these aspects of our society get reflected when it comes to extremely competitive, fast-paced, market-facing realities, probably bring out the worst of us in many cases. So that was the data that I wanted to share just to set the context. Of course, McKinsey is not the only authority on this. And there have been other reports by various other people, but this one was particularly looking at Asia. So I thought it was interesting to see how we compared with. So we're not comparing ourselves necessarily to Scandinavia or, other countries that are seen as perhaps more progressive on this front. But what we're doing with compared with our neighbors also. So yeah, I attribute that to really and this whole culture of having to do the FaceTime and stay late and equating work productivity with visibility, those kind of things that have been enshrined in the way we work for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Aparna, for that. I think that's an unfortunate reality, which I also think the data that you speak about what we know from the National Mental Health Survey in India. Although we do not have specifics around work and mental health data, there I think it more or less speaks to the high burden of disease and specifically mental health and mental health problems in the adult population. But Krish, curious to hear from your perspective as well. What do you feel about the same?
No, I think Aparna's covered it. India's the thing about India is a very competitive, fast-growing country, and when I've been around, I've seen the same in China also. It's like there's lots of energy, there's high competition, and therefore people tend to work hard and work late and all of those things. And that's there. On top of that, I think India has this enormous diversity, not only the generational, but the diversity of backgrounds that people come from. That really is the other one. And the different types of people that are there, that adds more to the mix. And you mentioned about this digital culture. I think that's really the other one, which is really putting lots more pressures all across. Yeah. So I think these are all the factors playing in. While things have, I wouldn't say that it's really, many companies have understood and there are lots of good things happening across in corporate India. But yes, this highly competitive nature, a strong hierarchy or still hierarchical, not still there, a very strong, what do you call, digital kind of pressure to really respond quickly. And of course, a very big diversity across all paths, I think really add to the mix there. But yes, I think if I look back and say, okay, and I've seen, let's say, compared to Asian country, let's say Japan or something, there again, the same culture exists, stay late, work late, socialize late, and all kinds of things. India is a little better compared to some of those countries. I think some of corporate India's learned and they're trying to do it. But still, these are areas that we still need to really focus and work on. Yeah.
Right, right. Right. So I think the tougher question over here that I have in response to that, because both of you speak about challenges and a culture that is very pervasive, long-standing, and seems to be having a lot of negative consequences. So can you tell us a bit more about what are your personal perspectives on whether work-life balance is a myth in India or is it a reality? And also if you could tell us a bit more about why do you feel that way?
You go ahead now, Krish.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think this whole concept of work-life balance. I mean, it's this is something elusive, right? I mean, it's everybody's searching for it. It's like that nirvana state that everyone wants, and you'll never achieve it. Yeah, I think that's something we've got to realize. Now, and the point that I personally feel that is work-life balance is different thresholds for different people. Yeah. And I think some people like to work hard, work late, and they're happy doing it. Some may not be. And sometimes working hard late continuously for some time may lead to burnout, but they find different ways to really manage things across. Yeah. But therefore, work life balance is really, I think the issue comes when it is lack of autonomy, a lack of control over it. Yeah, that's where I think the challenges come. And the second thing is when this whole work-life balance leads to more toxicity in the workplace. As long as there is work-life balance, but there is also an enabling workplace, then I think people manage, they have different ways to do it. But if you therefore, just to summarize, I think this is very individual oriented. Yeah, it's not a thing. While everybody wants it, I mean, each one has their own particular needs, and I think we've got to respect that. I think the thing that I see is where there is lack of autonomy, lack of control over your own kind of thing, and there is toxicity in the workplace, then this work-life balance really becomes an issue, and it kind of leads to dysfunctional kind of behaviors and health. But there are some people who work late, some people who enjoy it, and they kind of thrive on it. I don't want to blanket by saying we should not work late, work hard, and work late, but it's how do you manage that? The other thing, there are two, three other things that I think in India it really is tough. One is the commute. I mean, if you look at a place like Bangalore, I mean, everybody commutes. It's about an hour and a half, and that kind of puts extra pressure on people. Lack of infra in terms of managing the other things, I mean, for women working, I mean, the kind of times that they got to do, so I think all those add up. I think it's just that it's a whole ecosystem. about the infra, about the commute, about the other challenges that are there. I was just reading a Gallup report. Gallup did a state of the workplace study. And one of the things they found in India was that India was very high on workplace anger. Yeah. While stress was quite across the thing, India was not that bad, but daily instances of workplace anger and sadness, India was very high. So it's just this, so therefore, I think we ought to take it all in that thing. So just to summarize, work-life balance is, I mean, I would say it's an elusive thing. Yeah, everyone finds their balance and does it. But when it is under pressure, when it is seems coercive, when there is toxicity in the environment, then that really becomes an issue. And I think that's where we got to say, how do we really ensure that that is not there, and provide the supporting infrastructure to make people make the best out of their lives.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Krish. And Aparna, if I could come, before I come to you, if I could just stay with that thought about how it seems to be an elusive concept, Krish, could you reflect a bit about whether you feel there's been changes over the decades about the narrative of work life, also whether it's possible or not? Do you feel like it's increasingly becoming more difficult, for instance, to maintain that, or it's becoming like, what do you think are changes over time that we have seen as well in the workplace? Do you feel like these challenges have remained for a long time and they're just getting worse over time? Or there was a time when we used to do better at work balance?
I'm just reflecting back on my own experience. Yeah. And, early in my career, I used to work late. I mean, we used to take pride that we're leaving office at 8 p.m. and catching a train back or whatever it is. That's what it was as young people. So I don't think it was, it was at those days we used to also work on Saturdays. I mean, some half a day or Saturday we used to go to office all the way, trudge along and then do something. Partly it was the enjoyment of work, partly it was like you wanted to make a contribution, but partly yes, sometimes it is also due to that peer pressure that you had to do it. Yeah. But I think what has now happened, I see, is I think the generation is different. Yeah, I think their needs and things are different, and we got to understand that. I think they've realized they've got other things to do. Number one. Number two, I think the challenges across the country and the pressures on people's time have increased, and therefore, and the work has stayed as competitive, and work has become even tougher, and the digital thing has increased. So I personally feel that the pressures on work-life balance have increased over time from where I've seen, and therefore people working now are under pressure because of many of these things. The digital pressure of responding quickly. You got to be at call 24 hours. You're supposed to get back. The businesses are moving at a fast pace, so you got to keep up with it. Your own needs have increased, and you want to do different things, so that's also there. So I think I personally feel that the pressure and the infra challenges have not completely gone away and sometimes increased. So therefore, I think it's increased in my view over time.
So thanks, Krish. And I'm really glad that you're bringing up these perspectives which move beyond the individual and the workplace, but also to looking at environmental and structural issues that contribute to the idea of work-life balance as well. I think the audience is also resonating a lot with what you're saying, because there seems to be a lot of questions around what are the solutions to this and what are the practices we can adopt. So if I could just tell everyone that we're going to definitely come to that. Before that, if I could go to Aparna, your thoughts about whether work-life balance is a myth or reality, and if you feel like there are any generational shifts as well.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I would agree with a lot of what Krish said. I would also add that this whole issue of the global aspects. So you're doing calls with the US late into the night. You might then wake up and do calls with other parts of Asia early in the morning. So, I think that global side of it also adds to the always on culture. To your fact about whether the myth or reality, I mean, definitely in a country of our size, both stories will exist, but certainly the stories we hear much more of it being a myth than being a reality. And anecdotally, like I would say for myself also, as somebody who's living with bipolar disorder, just the ability of having the autonomy of being able to choose. So I don't even look at it now for me as work-life balance. I look at it as work-life boundaries. And do I have the boundaries can I choose where the work begins and where life ends, or where life ends and work begins? Can I choose those boundaries? So I don't really think of I'm trying to achieve a balance between these two things. I think of my day as having boundaries, and do I have the flexibility to choose them based on what's happening in the day, what the workload is, pursuing the projects that I want. And I mean, I would say that I'm very lucky that I have that flexibility, but most people who are working, because I pretty much work for myself, but most people who are not working for themselves or working in a company may not have that. The other thing that I have seen, though, is I have, and one particular startup founder comes to mind. They have different ways of working, which they're able to accommodate different work styles of their leadership team when they are working. So let's say the CEO might wake up early and start working, and then go and do some yoga and walk around, and actually end up getting to the office only by 11 or 12. But they've been working in the morning already for 2 or 3 hours, done some calls with people, but they're coming into the office when it suits them. Or some of the other colleagues, if they need to start their day earlier, and then they can leave by about 6 o'clock, because they need to go and attend a show at a cultural center or something like that. They have the flexibility. So I think a lot of this, and I'm sure when we discuss solutions, we could go into that, depends on the leadership culture and really the mindset of the manager who's managing them. So the stories where I see it being more of a reality then depends on these kind of situations, rather than people who are totally constrained by the things that Krish talked about earlier in terms of, the commute, the always on culture, the technology, the fast pace, the growth, and knowing that your job can be, you can be replaced by somebody else very soon, in the job market that we have. So, yeah.
Right. So thanks, Aparna. It seems to be that there's unanimous agreement that we're looking at something which is very elusive and almost like a unicorn. But we'll, of course, there has to be some silver lining, which we'll get to. Before we speak about another aspect which you brought up, Aparna, which is mental health, I just had one more question for Krish around what does work-life balance look like in the informal sector? We know that from economic data, that majority of the people employed in India are employed in the informal sector, as a result of which they're lacking protections. They might have increased stress levels, and that will have knock-on effects as well on work-life balance. So could you comment a bit more about the state of the informal sector? Do these conversations exist, and what do you feel about it?
Yeah, I know sometimes I feel that this work-life balance is a very elitist concept, people talking about. But you look at so many of these people in the informal sector, the way they manage it, and partly because they're forced to do it, partly because of their livelihood and various other things, they're forced to do it. The delivery boys, during rain, late hours, they've got to work so long to make things happen. The vegetable vendors sitting with their families and doing many things. So I think what I'm saying is, while work-life balance in the corporate sector is much talked about, there is something that we also have to look for. Look at this unorganized sector and the challenges that they have. And I think sometimes we shouldn't really forget that, because they have even bigger challenges. They have even bigger challenges. And I think much more. And there's hardly any infra to really support them other than their own family and ecosystem. And they've got to manage through that. And they're doing it because they need to make that livelihood. And I think somewhere we got to broaden that and say, how do we really make life even better for that large group of unorganized people also?
Right. Thanks, Krishan. If I could just again diversify this question a bit, and this is for both you and Aparna. What do you think are these challenges that people are presenting with? I think both of you have alluded to data around anxiety and depression and stress and burnout. But could you tell us a bit more about, are there any recurrent themes that you're seeing or patterns amongst Indian professionals or Indian workers working both in the unorganized as well as the formal sector, which we really need to think a lot more about?
Okay, if I can say one thing, I think we've talked about, this always on culture. We've talked about the whole idea of toxic workplaces and working for managers or cultures where, you're not respected and your views are undermined, and it's very demanding. So I want to talk about the emotional overload that people carry, that I think that this sort of emotional labor that comes with all of this, which is really unseen. And I think, Krish, that point you made about the rage, just suggests that people are carrying a lot in them. Of course, as a woman, I would say that yes, women have a huge brunt of this because they've got another whole set of responsibilities. But it's not that men are immune from those responsibilities either. But I think we really don't talk about the sort of emotional labor that people are doing as a result of all of this. I just the other day I was in the gym with my personal trainer, who's about 30 years old. But he just told me, madam, it's just so difficult commuting. I mean, halat kharab ho jati hai. He's a 30-year-old man, and he's a fit guy, and he's struggling with that commute, right? So all these kind of things that how they weigh on people and how they're supposed to, perform. I think that we don't sort of have that perspective, or we just expect people, let's say, for example, to show up not knowing what else they have going on with them. So that was one thing I'd love us to be sensitive to.
Yeah. No, I think if you look at it, what is this work-life balance? Let's say dysfunctional work-life balance. What does it lead to? Yeah, I think it probably leads to burnout. Yeah, in one instance, maybe various mental health issues, etc., etc. And to the company, maybe a lack of engagement, productivity, etc. Yeah, I think that's what really this whole thing is. Now, how do you manage it? Clearly, I think it is partly, if you just look at it, the role of the manager, how it is, and if that person, even in any company, whatever the culture, the manager can play a role making a difference. I think that's a big role that they play. Yeah, I think the role of manager and the team is very important. If the team is toxic or the manager is toxic, then this is like unbearable. Then this is they just can't stand that. So I think that's the first thing that we got to really manage. The second is, what does the organization do to really enable many other things? Therefore, is there some flexibility that people can do in terms of times, etc., etc. And most companies allow a couple of hours here and there, and etc. And then they also allow 2 days a week to work and 3 days from home. But now many want people to come back. But yes, that's the other thing. But is there a culture within the organization where people can voice these issues? And I think the point is, if there is little more control and autonomy that people have over their jobs and how they do and what they do, that goes a long way. How do we really do that? And I think that's something that many companies are trying in different ways. But I think the role of the manager, I think, is primary. The company, where if it creates a culture where there is a little bit of discussion, people can raise their views, have some flexibility, have some autonomy or control over how they work. Those two will be very, very important, I think, as we how to solve this. I think the larger question is, we're all in this world where for many people, commuting, working, managing family, managing things is tough. So I think that's another thing that one has to look at and say, what support system can be there to really make people manage their lives better. So I'd stop there.
Yeah. Can I just add to that, Urvita? You talked about roles, Krish, and this is something.
Yes,
Yeah, this is something that I do in my workshops, where we ask this question on who is responsible for emotional and mental well-being. And I actually outline 5 stakeholders in this, which is me as an individual, manager, as you said, the team, and then the organization as a whole, and then the leadership. So, and each of these have a specific role to play when it comes to mental health. And it's not a situation when it just is like, oh, somebody is stressed, let's look at it as an individual issue, of saying that so and so is stressed or so and so is burnout. But actually, this is like a collective way of looking at it. So the purpose of these sessions is really for companies to identify and to understand what those roles are. I think I've pasted a link to one of my pieces which talks about this. Maybe y'all can post it on one of the chats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, just to add on, the default thing could be that, listen, here's a person who's not resilient enough. And I think it's about, and is that default about the individual or the default thing about the system? Yeah, I think that's where we got to do. I think in the past we would say, yeah, many people are managing. Here's 1 or 2 people who are not able to manage it. And I think as they say, the fundamental attribution error kind of plays in, and the bias saying that's the thing. But if you say, listen, the default is, where is the system? What can we do? Where I think that's the thing. I think many organizations are looking at it. I'm not, I've seen many companies have done phenomenal jobs in building it. But I think it's a culture that is not very easy to change in India. I think there is a bit of a taboo. There's a little bit about this thing about you've got to have that resilience and the thing to fight through all of this, which I think sometimes is a little bit of a tough ask. And I think we've got to temper that and say, listen, it's not about, while there is a bit about it, it's not about the individual, it's about what the system is also. So I think that perspective also is very important.
Thanks, Krish and Aparna, for a very balanced perspective. Because again, you find conversations leaning towards what do we do at an individual level when there is like a severe type of a mental health problem, for example, at the workplace. And these are not typically looked at as like, what are the contributors to it in the workplace? What are the systemic, structural, environmental contributors to it that need to be addressed as well? So I think that was a very useful and insightful unpacking of how emotions, culture, as well as generational shifts all shape our mental health and work. I think that also segues well into the segment where I want us to talk a bit more about solutions. And I really appreciate that both of you have started responding to that. So just if I could pick on a bit more about the responses that you gave earlier. Krish, you spoke about the importance of what do organizations do, targeting managers, the role of the leadership team, etc. Do you feel like there are good models of workplace standards that exist in India? Aparna speaks about workshops that she does. So just curious about what has your experience been about models that have worked? Aparna, the question for you is about what has the response been when you try to target so many people in the system and really give them a reality check that if you want to change, multiple types of people also have to change?
Well, I think India is a large country, many different companies, very diverse. Yeah, I think there are a set of companies which have really looked at this. Large employers, multinational companies, and companies which have really been at the forefront of thinking. I think most companies now have an employee survey where they really track this. Yeah, and they kind of track engagement and they track many of these things. There's also a thing about how does the leadership set the tone at the top. Yeah, and I think that's the other thing many companies are doing, increasingly talking about that. Maybe still a long way to go, but that's the other thing that many companies are doing. The third one is really creating greater awareness of these issues. And again, I've seen, I've seen many companies, especially in the IT services sector, people are doing it. They're talking about these issues and what it is, et cetera, and creating greater awareness. And I think as you mentioned, post pandemic, this has increased a lot, and you see a lot of this. Companies also have what they call as a EAP, where they provide people can reach out if they have issues. So these are all the things that companies have done. But is it I think they're all in the right direction, and many companies are doing it. Yeah, but I think there are still pockets because of very strong, deep-rooted cultural factors that I think still play, very strongly in this. I think that's where companies have to do a lot more, continue to do a lot more to really look at setting the tone at the top, because that's I think is a very big determinant of what really happens down the organization and the culture. So I think that's very important. And I think this whole set of, because the big player in this is the manager. How do we really incent it? Because and if I were a manager, I'm also under pressure. I've got to deliver work, and as they say, the middle manager is a bit in the puddle because there's so much there. And I think we got to realize that and also look at their role and see how we can make it easier for them. I mean, I'm just talking about a middle manager, let's say in IT services. They have all their employees working remotely. They don't even know what they're doing. How do you do it? So how do they get work out of it? So, and there's a pressure from the client or the customer. So you got to understand that part also. And how do we really manage? If you can get the manager aware, trained, empathetic, then I think the job is done. Yeah, I think setting the tone at the top, building that culture, ensuring that the manager, you understand and see what it is, and creating various other forums. And I think that's where support groups that employees can reach out to, other thing. And many companies have really started a lot of kind of, activity clubs and various other things so that people can really participate in the workplace, build a stronger team. So they do all of that. So I think creating those kind of structures within an organization where people can really kind of, relax, do something, breakout roles, breakout time, all that really helps. So I think those are all the things we got to do. But while companies are doing it, I think very strong cultural factors at times, which we have to really overcome and continue to do that with greater momentum.
Thanks, Krish. I think these seem to be very concrete tools that you're speaking about. Just also, it seems like Aparna, you've tried these in the workshops that you build, where you're aiming to build capacities of individuals. So, what has your experience been in terms of the response that you're getting from people?
Okay, chalo, Krish, I'm going to argue with you. It's no fun if we're always agreeing. So the point is, telling a person to go for a meetup and a yoga class is like saying that, I'm drowning and you give me swimming lessons. It's like what I'm saying is that to say that, I'm going to expect the work out of you and then you have to figure out a way of coping with the work. That I don't agree with at all. And I really think that from a system point of view, the companies that I've interviewed, because I've also been, before getting into this mental health space, I used to be interviewing a lot of CEOs and companies. I've seen some companies really make an effort to say that we will block certain time out, no meetings on, let's say, on a Wednesday from 9 to 12, which will just, give people a little bit of time to catch up on whatever they need to catch up. Or somebody saying, CEO saying that let's try not to make calls over the weekend, to my team, or let's try not to schedule meetings after like 7 o'clock. Okay. So I've seen a few of these moves by some companies. I agree market realities are very different and, there are times, but I think that those are the kind of work practices and processes that I want to hear more from leaders, right? What are they doing to give people more autonomy to their time, as what you said, Krish? These EAPs and all that have been there. They are important, no doubt about it. There are some very good companies that are now offering all these services and clients, but typically the usage rates are like 10% or 5%, or they're pretty low.
Even lesser.
Yeah, they're very low, right? So nobody wants to talk necessarily to a company sponsored therapist right now, not especially when you have AI nowadays. So what I'm trying to say is that the recognition really is the question we asking ourselves: who is responsible for emotional and mental well-being? Am I the only person as an employee who's responsible? I am obviously responsible for that. The manager plays a very critical role. I'm so glad, Krish, you've emphasized that repeatedly. But they also have, their targets to deliver. So I think that it's when I do these workshops, I see companies have aha moments when they realize like, oh, wow, it's up to all of us, that we want to be high performing, but we also want to be people oriented. And the data really shows that only like 10% of companies are actually high performance and people oriented both. Sadly, I would say half the companies are neither of them. But the pressure for companies to be performance oriented is so high that for them to actually believe that being performance oriented and people oriented in the long run, investing in the kind of HR initiatives, Krish, that you would have sort of sponsored your entire life and career, like not everyone is doing that, right? So just seeing that as a strategic space that they want to occupy, that not that it's something that's good to do, but it's something that we must do. That I think is going to be the real driver of getting to a place of workplace well-being.
Thanks, Aparna. Before I go on, Krish, any reflections on the disagreement? Because it seems
No. I think that's fair. I mean, it's not. I think the point is you got to have everything. You got to have the leader and the culture in the company, but you got to also have other things that really help people cope with things and ensure that there are areas that they can manage. So you got to keep all of that. They're not the only solutions there. But yeah, as I said, the work itself is a bit of a thing. Some enjoy it, some don't. Yeah, and some have different things. So I think it's not one size fits all. But how do you really manage? And that's where the company has to ensure that there is a little bit of autonomy for for the individuals to really see what works, and if there are things that are not working for them, how can they raise and manage it? And I think that's what is very important there, and the role of the manager, because the manager, the three key things: the tone at the top from the leaders, it sets the culture; the role of the managers, and the kind of a supportive team and things that are there. I think these three will really help manage this.
Right, right. So it sounds like there's agreement that when leadership moves is when you actually see change. It's not only about people going into yoga sessions and therapy, but you need mid-level and senior level management as well to go with individuals towards change. We do have just a few minutes before we open for Q&A. So I had one last question, and then we'll open up and then come back to more questions if there's time, which is just to briefly also speak about the issue of burnout, because it's often misunderstood as well as interchangeably used with stress, although it's very distinct clinically. While stress is typically a short-term response to external pressure, burnout, on the other hand, is a very chronic occupational phenomenon. So in India's culture, workplace culture, that high pressure culture that you all have been speaking about for so long, where long hours and constant availability is often seen as commitment, burnout can easily be missed or even normalized. So just if you could reflect on, have you seen any changes around discussions on burnout? Are there any policies that you have seen that have worked and be differently to prevent burnout in ways, given that it's a huge problem?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point you brought out. Many people don't even know about it, and I think and many people don't realize. And sometimes, it just yeah, it's a bit too late for that. Yeah, as I said, many companies have tried different ways to it in terms of. As Aparna suggested, many companies have tried this, no meetings on this, but it's very tough to mandate these things across companies. You can put it, but then very tough to control and mandate those. Well, I think there is this thing about, if you look at IT services companies, many of them really do calls late in the evening, but they have time. They travel. If you look at they leave. Probably they leave work by around 4:35, but they reach home and then they do calls till night, etc. So that's the kind of thing that they do. So I think while companies have tried to do all of this, I don't think there is, we've come to a situation like in Europe where you can't send mails, official mails after office hours and stuff like that. I think that's the kind of thing that I would say is the gold standard. I'm not sure if we're going to reach there, but how do we really, ensure that there is a little bit more what I call more mandate for people to really not work that late. I think that's something that we've got to try and figure out and come to right thing. I don't have an answer because it's tough to really mandate across the organization, and I've seen those kind of mandates have never worked. But how do you do it is something we got to figure out. Aparna, any thoughts you have on this?
I guess the thing is, Krish, from what you're saying is that, there can be periodic times when we are all working really, really hard. Like we might put in, 16, 18-hour days or something. Like there could be emergencies or things that happen that require that. But if certain professions require you to work like that all the time, and the culture, let's say even abroad, investment banking or law firms abroad have that kind of culture, working really hard, and there's been pushback against that abroad also. But what I'm saying is, if every time that you're always expected to work very, very late, that's when the issue
That's right.
comes in, and that then becomes a cultural, like, do you always have so much work and projects, and where is the role of how you're negotiating with your clients or whatever environment you're working with that is constantly necessitating such long days. I think that's that question that needs to be asked really. And the other question I would say is for burnout is that it's also comes from not being visible. Like overwork is our definition of burnout, prolonged overwork, and then with multiplied by stress, but also times when you are not visible to people, you're not feeling valued in the organization. Those are also things that can lead to burnout. So it is more nuanced, Urvita, as you were saying.